The exploration ship, named Horizon, was never meant to be inside the heart of the mighty Galactic Empire. Its crew of 5 humans had only been testing a new jump drive, a machine still unstable and not fully ready. The coordinates were supposed to take them to a quiet star system where they could gather data in peace. Instead, the stars outside the window shifted into strange colors. The hull rattled like it was about to break, and suddenly, they were somewhere else entirely. At first, the crew did not even realize the scale of their mistake. To them, it looked like just another cluster of stars, nothing different from the thousands they had passed before. But the local sensors screamed warnings. They had appeared inside a space zone guarded by fleets so large and powerful that even the mention of their name made other alien empires go silent. The humans had entered the core territory of the Galactic Empire, a place where no outsider dared to drift, and yet they looked around with the calmness of tourists. Other ships noticed immediately. The Empire's border patrol, shaped like massive winged predators, moved toward the horizon with a silence that felt heavier than sound. For any other race, this would have been the end, a death sentence without even a trial. But inside the horizon, the humans behaved as if they had simply taken a wrong turn during a holiday trip. The captain, a man named Lewis, leaned back in his chair and sighed. He tapped the console and said to his crew, almost jokingly, that the jump drive worked better than expected. It had dropped them straight into somebody else's living room. The crew laughed as if the thought of trespassing into the most dangerous empire in the galaxy was not a threat, but a funny mistake. The patrol fleet sent warnings in sharp alien code. Their signals carried the weight of destruction like thunder. Promising a storm, it demanded surrender, demanded the humans kneel before imperial law, demanded silence. Lewis scratched his beard and translated the message on the screen, then shrugged and asked if anyone had snacks left. His crew answered with chuckles, their voices casual, as though they were ignoring the dozens of warships surrounding them. They did not even reach for weapons, not that they had many. The Horizon was not a warship, but a science vessel, armed with little more than basic defenses. Yet the humans treated the blockade of warships like a curious sight to study, not a threat to fear. Across the system, alien stations recorded everything. News traveled fast through the Empire. Entire colonies stopped their work to listen to the reports. The reaction was always the same: shock. Outsiders had entered the Empire's heartlands, and they acted as if they were unbothered. Some aliens thought this was madness. Others thought it was bravery, but all of them agreed on one thing. No one had ever seen this before. Normally, when outsiders crossed into the Empire's space, they begged for mercy. These humans did not even bother. Their calmness spread like a dangerous fire, confusing and unnerving everyone who watched. The patrol leader, a commander with sharp insect-like mandibles, opened a direct channel to the Horizon. His voice was filled with authority, deep and metallic. He demanded again that they shut down their systems and wait for capture. The humans looked at each other. Lewis smiled, pressed the button, and replied in a relaxed tone that they had simply gotten lost. And if it was not too much trouble, could someone point them to the nearest fuel station? The commander paused. His kind had crushed rebellions, burned planets, and silenced entire species. Never had anyone spoken to him like this. He expected fear. He expected trembling voices. But the humans sounded like travelers asking for directions. Inside the Horizon, the crew continued to act as if the situation was normal. One crew member adjusted a sensor to map nearby stars. Another made notes on how the Empire's ships were designed, fascinated by their sleek, deadly forms. Someone even pulled out a music player, filling the cabin with soft tunes while hundreds of weapons locked on their position. Their casual behavior was not an act. Humans had learned long ago that fear only made bad situations worse. If you could laugh in the face of danger, sometimes danger stepped back. The commander, now unsettled, sent word to the capital. The report described these beings as reckless intruders with no respect for the Empire's strength. But hidden between his words was confusion, almost disbelief. Why did these beings not kneel? Why did they not beg? The capital ordered that the ship be escorted deeper inside for judgment before the emperor himself. And so, the patrol surrounded the horizon and pulled it toward the central world, where billions would soon watch the fate of these strange creatures inside the ship. Louis stood by the window, watching the glowing lines of the escort fleet. He grinned, as if this was nothing more than a scenic tour. His crew trusted him, their eyes calm, their laughter steady. To them, it was an adventure, another story to tell. To the rest of the Empire, it was something terrifying, something that broke the order of the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was not feared. Instead, it was forced to question the nature of the small, fragile-looking species called human beings. The horizon was dragged through space by the escort fleet, each alien warship glowing like a blade in the darkness. To anyone watching, it looked like a predator guiding prey to its master. Inside the human ship, however, there was no panic. The crew moved around calmly, checking readings, sipping coffee, even cracking quiet jokes about how grand the alien ships looked. They did not realize, or perhaps they did, and simply did not care that billions of eyes across the Empire were watching them right now. Every broadcast channel carried the news, the intruders who entered the heart of the Empire without fear. Every citizen waited to see them bow, beg, or be destroyed. The fleet reached the Empire's central world, a planet wrapped in rings of defense and towers that touched the clouds. The escort forced the horizon into a massive docking bay larger than entire cities. Hundreds of alien soldiers waited there, their weapons glowing, their eyes cold. The humans stepped out of their ship in plain clothes, carrying no weapons, walking like tourists stepping into a new marketplace. Gasps rose from the crowd. Some aliens muttered that the humans had no sense of danger. Others whispered that maybe they had some hidden power. The soldiers expected them to tremble, but instead they looked around curiously, pointing at the towering structures and even smiling as if they were impressed. The march to the Emperor's Hall was long. The palace was built to intimidate. Walls carved with the history of conquest, ceilings high enough to hold entire ships, flames burning in bowls of black stone. Every step was meant to remind intruders of the Empire's unstoppable might. Yet the humans walked casually, whispering among themselves, asking silly questions like whether the fire was real or just some kind of hologram. Guards clenched their weapons tighter, confused by the lack of fear. To them, fear was natural. It was how order was maintained. But here these small beings showed none. Finally, the giant doors opened, and the humans were led into the throne chamber. At its center sat the Emperor himself, a figure both majestic and terrifying. His body shimmered with living armor, scales of black and silver that reflected the light like blades. His 4 eyes glowed with power. Around him stood his council, generals who had crushed countless wars. The air itself felt heavy, as though the chamber wanted to suffocate the visitors. The Emperor leaned forward, his voice echoing like thunder, demanding silence. The humans stopped and looked at him, but their eyes did not widen with fear. Louis, their captain, simply tilted his head and gave a small nod, as if greeting a neighbor. The Emperor's first words were sharp. He reminded them that they had trespassed into the most guarded space in the galaxy. He told them of the thousands of fleets at his command, of the weapons that had turned planets into ashes, of the empires that had fallen at his feet. His words carried the weight of centuries of fear. For a moment, the entire hall waited for the humans to collapse in terror. But Louis only scratched his chin and replied calmly that it had been a mistake, that they were only explorers, and if the Emperor was finished with the speech, perhaps someone could point them to the nearest supply depot so they could repair their ship. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Generals shifted in anger. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. He could not believe what he had heard. Never before had someone stood in his hall and treated his power as if it were nothing more than background noise. He leaned forward, his claws digging into the arms of his throne, and unleashed another wave of threats. He described the weapons his empire had created, tools designed to break the body and the mind, horrors that no living being had ever survived. The humans listened politely. One of them, a young woman named Kara, even pulled out a small device and began sketching notes, muttering that the design sounded interesting, but also impractical. The audacity left the chamber stunned. The Emperor demanded to know what gave them such courage. He asked if their species commanded fleets larger than his own, if their worlds were hidden behind some unbreakable shield. Louis shook his head and said plainly that they had neither. They were explorers, not conquerors. Then he smiled faintly and added that fear had never really helped humans survive. When danger came, they faced it, even laughed at it, because fear only slowed you down. To the council, this sounded like madness. But to some in the chamber, it sounded like something else. A kind of strength the Empire could not measure. The Emperor did not show it. But doubt touched him. These beings had no armies, no advanced weapons. Yet they stood in his hall without trembling. If they were not powerful, then what were they? He decided he needed proof. He ordered that the humans would face a trial, a challenge of strength. And survival? If they won, they would live. If they lost, their deaths would serve as a warning to the galaxy. The chamber filled with cheers of approval from the generals. This was the way of the Empire. But in the crowd, many civilians watching the broadcast felt something new, unease. The humans looked at one another. Instead of fear, there were smiles. One of them asked what the prize was if they won. Another asked if food would be served afterward. The soldiers did not know whether to laugh or tremble. The humans were either the bravest beings ever seen or the most foolish. As the guards escorted them away to prepare for the trial, the Emperor's gaze followed, heavy with suspicion. For the first time in years, he felt something close to uncertainty. Billions across the Empire waited eagerly for the trial to begin. They expected screams, blood, and a lesson in obedience. But hidden deep inside, many wondered if they would instead witness something far more terrifying, the proof that fear had no power over the strange species called humans. The announcement of the trial spread across the Galactic Empire like fire on dry fields. Entire cities stopped their work to watch the coming broadcast. Children sat wide-eyed before holoscreens, elders whispered old warnings, and soldiers sharpened their blades in anticipation. It had been centuries since outsiders were foolish enough to stand before the Emperor's judgment. And never before had anyone dared to face it without trembling. The humans had become a spectacle, a strange new thing that no one could fully understand. Billions waited, expecting to see these fragile beings broken in the arena, their screams feeding the pride of the Empire. The arena itself was a colossus carved from black stone and iron, larger than mountains, designed to swallow any sound and magnify fear. At its heart lay a wide battlefield where beasts and warriors had died for centuries to entertain the throne. This was no simple stage. It was built with traps, shifting floors, hidden weapons, and gates that released nightmares bred only for killing. When the humans were led inside, the crowd erupted with roars. Alien voices thundered like storms, chanting for blood. The Emperor sat above, his 4 eyes glowing with satisfaction. He wanted fear. He wanted screams. He wanted these strange creatures to finally understand the weight of the Empire. But as the humans entered, there was no fear. Louis walked at the front with steady steps, his hands resting calmly behind his back. Kara followed, gazing at the ceiling with curiosity, whispering to another crew member about the engineering of the arena. 2 of the younger crew laughed as they nudged each other, making jokes about how the whole place looked like an oversized sports stadium. The cameras caught every smile, every casual glance, and the entire Empire saw it. Gasps rippled across the audience. How could these small beings walk into death with laughter? The first gate opened, and from the shadows poured the war beasts. They were horrors bred for nothing but violence. Towering creatures with jagged claws, armored hides, and mouths lined with teeth that could rip through steel. The crowd cheered as the beasts roared and charged, their massive bodies shaking the ground. Most species would have collapsed in terror, but the humans did not retreat. Louis simply said, "All right, team, let's try not to get eaten today," his tone almost playful. The crew spread out, moving with the kind of teamwork that came not from training in this arena, but from years of surviving impossible odds together. Kara picked up a broken piece of stone from the ground and tested its weight. Another crew member ripped loose a metal rod from a shattered pillar. They had no advanced weapons, but they made tools out of whatever was at hand. The beasts lunged, their claws slicing the air. Yet the humans dodged with speed and cunning, always moving, never letting the monsters pin them down. One of the younger crew threw sand into a beast's eyes, distracting it long enough for Lewis to slam the metal rod into its jaw. The crowd gasped at the clever trick. Shocked that something so simple could stagger a beast meant to terrify armies, more beasts surged, but the humans never panicked. They shouted encouragement to one another, cracked jokes, even while dodging death, and fought not with brute strength, but with creativity. Kara climbed onto the back of one beast, jamming the stone into the gap of its armored scales until the monster howled and collapsed. Another human used the arena's own traps against the beasts, leading one into a shifting floor that swallowed it whole. Every move was watched by billions, and every move shattered the image the Empire had built of humans as weak, fragile creatures. The Emperor leaned forward, his claws digging into his throne. His generals shifted uneasily. This was supposed to be entertainment, a quick execution. Instead, it was turning into humiliation. Each beast that fell only made the humans look stronger, stranger, and far more dangerous than anyone had expected. The crowd, which had begun by cheering for blood, now fell into uneasy silence. Some even began to cheer for the humans, their voices rising uncertainly, like whispers of rebellion in the air. The final beast emerged, larger than the rest, its body covered in armor so thick it had never been pierced. The generals smiled cruelly, certain this would end the humans. But once again, the humans reacted differently. Lewis gathered his crew and gave quick instructions. They worked together, distracting the beast, tiring it, tricking it into slamming against the arena walls, until cracks formed in its armor. Then, at the right moment, Kara jammed the metal rod into the weakest point, and the beast collapsed with a thunderous roar. The arena shook with the sound of the monster's fall. For a moment, silence filled the Empire. Billions stared at their screens, unable to believe what they had seen. The humans, small and unarmed, had done what even trained warriors often failed to do. They had defeated the Emperor's monsters, and they had done it laughing. Lewis turned to the Emperor's throne, bowed casually, and asked if there was any chance of dinner after the show. The words carried through the broadcast, and the Empire itself trembled. The Emperor's face remained a mask of control, but inside his mind, questions burned. Who were these beings? How could they look at death and smile? The trial meant to break them had only raised their image higher. Citizens whispered to each other, fear mixing with awe. Generals scowled, unsure whether to feel insulted or afraid. The humans were led out of the arena, still calm, still joking with one another. To them, it had been just another challenge, something to overcome together. But to the Empire, it was something far greater. For the first time in living memory, the trial of the arena had failed to frighten. Instead, it had planted a seed of doubt in the heart of the mighty Galactic Empire. A whisper began spreading among the people, a whisper more dangerous than any weapon. Perhaps the humans were not intruders to be crushed. Perhaps they were something else entirely. Something the galaxy had never faced before. The news of the humans' victory in the arena spread like a storm across the Galactic Empire. On every world, in every station, in every ship, the story was the same. The strangers who walked into the Emperor's trial without fear had survived. They had not just survived, they had won. They had beaten beasts that no army had dared face, and they had done it with nothing but scraps of stone and iron. It's laughter on their lips, and teamwork that seemed unshakable. The arena had been meant to show the galaxy the Empire's strength, but instead, it had shown the humans' refusal to bend. And that single truth shook the Empire more deeply than any battle ever had. The generals gathered in the Emperor's war hall, a vast chamber of black steel and golden banners. Their voices rose in anger, echoing against the walls. Some demanded that the humans be executed immediately before their influence spread further. Others warned that killing them now would only make them martyrs. The council was split, but all of them agreed on one thing: the humans were dangerous. The Emperor listened silently, his four glowing eyes fixed on the burning hologram of the arena battle. He replayed the moment when the last beast fell, when the humans bowed casually, asking for dinner as though they had just finished a simple game. He felt a weight he had not felt in centuries. It was not fear, not yet, but it was something close. Across the Empire, ordinary citizens whispered about the humans, crowded markets and schools and mines beneath alien mountains. The same question spread: who were these beings who did not bow? Some whispered they were fools. Others whispered they were fearless gods in mortal form. A small seed of doubt crept into the Empire's people. If the humans could laugh in the face of death, what else could they do? And more dangerously, if they could stand against the Emperor's beasts. Maybe the Emperor was not as untouchable as he claimed in the capital city. Soldiers patrolling the streets overheard children pretending to be humans in their games, standing tall against invisible monsters and laughing at threats. The commanders grew nervous. It was small, harmless play, but it carried the spirit of rebellion. The humans had not come with armies or weapons, but their presence was already breaking the chains of fear that held the Empire together. Fear was the foundation of the Emperor's power, and if that fear began to crack, everything else would follow. Inside the horizon, the humans rested. They were tired, bruised, but not shaken. Lewis sat in the command chair sipping water, while Kara cleaned the cuts on her arms. One of the younger crew joked about how the beasts had smelled worse than the food they had eaten last week. Laughed together, unaware, perhaps simply uninterested in the chaos their actions had created outside. To them, it was just another strange adventure. They had no idea that entire star systems were now whispering their names. But the Emperor knew. That night he called a private meeting with his closest advisors. The chamber was dark, lit only by the red glow of starlight through the crystal windows. He spoke in a low voice, one that carried not rage but calculation. He admitted that killing the humans would not be enough. The people had already seen too much. The humans' fearlessness had spread like a disease, one that could not be stopped. With executions alone, they needed to be studied, understood, measured. Only then could the Empire decide whether they should be destroyed or perhaps used. One general, a hulking reptilian creature, growled that the humans must have hidden weapons. Another, with insect wings that buzzed nervously, insisted they must be warriors disguised as explorers. But the Emperor shook his head. Their ship was weak, their tools primitive, their bodies fragile. Yet their spirit was something different, something the Empire had never faced before. He ordered that the humans undergo another trial, not of beasts this time, but of war itself. They would be placed in a combat simulation against his elite soldiers. If they were truly fearless, then let them face the full might of the Empire's warriors. The decision was broadcast the next morning. Across the Empire, voices rose in excitement and dread. The arena had been a spectacle, but now this would be a test of war. Billions tuned their screens, eager to see whether the humans could stand against trained killers armed with the best weapons of the Empire. Some hoped the humans would finally fall, restoring the Empire's image. Others secretly hoped they would win again. For in their victory lay the possibility of freedom from centuries of oppression. When the humans were told of the new trial, they exchanged glances. Lewis raised an eyebrow and asked if it was another game. Kara smirked, saying that at least this time they might get to see how the Empire's soldiers actually fought. The guards escorting them looked away, unsettled by their tone. One had ever treated the Emperor's trials as amusement before. On the day of the simulation, humans were led into a vast chamber filled with shifting holograms and hard light constructs. The floor glowed with crimson light, shaping mountains, rivers, and cities in moments. Above, the Emperor and his generals watched from their thrones, waiting for the humans to finally break. Across the galaxy, billions held their breath. Elite soldiers entered from the opposite side, their armor shining, their weapons humming with deadly energy. These were warriors who had broken rebellions in a single night, killers who never failed. The humans, in their plain clothes, looked fragile in comparison, yet their faces showed no fear. Instead, Lewis stretched his arms like he was warming up for exercise. Kara crouched down to examine the terrain, muttering about how the hills could be used for cover. Another crew member cracked a grin and said, "Well, this should be fun." The crowd roared with anticipation. The signal blared. The war simulation began. For the first time in centuries, the Emperor felt something unfamiliar pressing against his heart. Not fear, not anger, doubt. The signal blared and the war simulation came alive. The ground beneath the humans shifted, turning into rocky terrain filled with glowing craters. Towers rose in the distance, shining with hard-light weapons. Across the battlefield, the Emperors. Elite soldiers spread out like shadows, their armor gleaming, their weapons humming with power. These were not wild beasts. These were disciplined killers, each one trained to crush armies. Billions of citizens watched the broadcast, certain that the humans would finally be destroyed. After all, no one had ever survived against the Emperors. Chosen, the humans, however, did not react as expected. Louis stood calmly, scanning the battlefield as if he were reading a map. Kara crouched, picking up a handful of the glowing dirt and letting it sift through her fingers. She was already looking for weaknesses in the terrain. The others checked their surroundings, pointing out cover, high ground, and potential traps. They had no advanced weapons, no armor, nothing but their sharp eyes and their teamwork. Yet instead of fear, they wore small smiles, as if this was nothing more than another puzzle to solve. The first wave came fast. The soldiers moved like a wall of fire, plasma bolts tearing through the air, explosions lighting up the field. Crowd gasped as the humans sprinted, but not in blind panic. They moved with purpose, using cover, splitting apart, calling out to one another. Louis shouted quick directions, his voice steady. Kara threw a piece of broken metal at one of the towers, tricking a soldier into firing early and revealing his position. Another crew member used the explosion from a plasma bolt to create smoke, hiding their movements. The humans were not just surviving, they were thinking faster than anyone watching could believe. The Emperor leaned forward in his throne, his eyes narrowing. His soldiers were fighting with discipline, but the humans were turning the battlefield into a game of tricks. Every shot missed was turned into an opportunity. Every explosion was redirected. Every mistake of the soldiers was punished by human creativity. One soldier cornered Kara, raising his glowing blade for the kill. She ducked at the last second, rolling beneath his legs, then yanked free a wire from his armor. Sparks flew, and the soldier collapsed in confusion. The crowd erupted in shock. No outsider had ever disarmed an elite like that. The simulation shifted. The terrain changed into a ruined city, full of collapsed towers and burning streets. Soldiers surrounded, the humans from every side. But instead of despair, the humans laughed. Louis muttered that it felt just like home after a rough Saturday night, and the crew chuckled as they dashed through the rubble. The soldiers closed in, but the humans used the buildings as traps, luring them into tight spaces where their weapons became useless. At one point, 2 humans collapsed a wall on top of 3 soldiers. Leaving the rest of the Empire's elite stunned, the generals in the observation chamber whispered angrily. Some demanded the simulation be ended, claiming it was a waste of time. Others leaned forward, unable to look away. They had seen warriors fight with courage before, but this was different. The humans did not just fight with courage, they fought with laughter. They treated fear as if it did not exist. And in doing so, they were breaking the rules of the galaxy itself. The final stage of the simulation activated. The ground split open, rivers of molten light pouring through the cracks. The remaining soldiers gathered, forming a line of firepower. It was overwhelming. The humans stood together, sweat dripping from their brows, but still smiling. Louis gave a nod, and they launched their final plan. They did not attack head-on. They used every trick they had learned, baiting shots, redirecting blasts, leading soldiers into each other's fire. Slowly, the unstoppable wall of elites began to crumble. One fell, then another, until only a handful remained. The crowd that had begun the day cheering for human deaths now watched in stunned silence. The last soldier fell with a roar, his armor smoking as he collapsed. The battlefield went quiet. Simulation flickered, the flames fading, the towers dissolving into light. And there, standing in the middle of the ruins, were the humans, bruised, exhausted, but smiling as if they had just finished a friendly competition. Billions across the empire gasped. The impossible had happened again. The emperor's beasts had fallen, and now his finest soldiers had been humiliated. The humans had not just survived, they had triumphed. At worst, they had done it without fear. Lewis looked up toward the throne and gave a small wave, his voice carrying through the simulation's speakers. "Thanks for the workout," he said. "That was fun." The words spread across the empire like a spark in dry grass. Fun. They had called the deadliest trial in the galaxy fun. Children repeated the word in the streets. Workers whispered it. In the mines, soldiers muttered it in their barracks, wondering how such a thing could be possible. The emperor sat back slowly, his eyes burning with thoughts no one else could read. For the first time in his reign, he had no clear answer. He had tried to break the humans with monsters and soldiers, but nothing had worked. They were not the strongest in body, nor did they have the greatest weapons. But they carried something. Far more dangerous, a spirit that could not be crushed, and the empire, once unshakable, was starting to tremble. The simulation chamber had gone silent after the last soldier fell. For a long moment, no one moved. The humans stood together in the center, brushing dust off their clothes, exchanging calm smiles as though they had just finished a training exercise. Billions of citizens across the empire sat frozen before their screens, waiting for the emperor's response. But the emperor himself did not speak. He sat still on his throne, his four eyes glowing, his clawed hands tightening on the armrests. In all his centuries of rule, never had he seen intruders act this way. Never had anyone laughed through his trials. Never had anyone left his elites broken. For the first time, the weight of his empire felt less secure. The guards escorted the humans back to their ship, the Horizon, but their steps were less steady now. Where before they had marched with pride, now they moved with unease. The humans walked casually, even joking with one another, as they returned to their vessel. Kara made a comment about how the simulation's holograms looked almost real but smelled terrible. And Lewis laughed, telling her to file a complaint with the Empire's Entertainment Bureau. The guards glanced at each other nervously, unable to understand how these fragile-looking beings could treat death like a minor inconvenience. In the streets of the capital city, citizens whispered. They gathered in markets and homes, replaying the broadcasts over and over. Children imitated the humans' laughter, pretending to face beasts without flinching. Miners returning from their shifts muttered that if humans could stand tall against the emperor's might, perhaps they too did not need to bow forever. Soldiers felt doubt creep into their hearts. They had always believed fear was the strongest weapon of the empire. But now they had seen something more dangerous: fearlessness. And once such a thing is seen, it cannot be forgotten. Inside the Horizon, the humans prepared to leave. Their ship had been repaired with supplies from the Empire. Though not freely given, the Emperor had allowed it only because he wanted them gone, out of his territory, out of his people's sight. Yet even as the humans prepared their jump drive, their casual behavior was being broadcast and dissected across the galaxy. They had left more than footprints in the Empire's space. They had left an idea that the Emperor was not invincible, an idea that laughter could be stronger than terror. The Emperor summoned his generals to a private chamber, away from the eyes of the public. His voice was sharp, his tone heavy with frustration. He demanded to know how such a weak species could have humiliated the Empire. The generals argued, some shouting that the humans must be destroyed before their influence spread further. Others insisting that their very existence proved the Empire needed to rethink its power. For the first time in centuries, the council was divided by fear of something so small, so unarmed, yet so unshaken. The Emperor silenced them all with a growl, admitted that destroying the humans now would be dangerous. Their deaths would turn them into symbols, martyrs, that the galaxy would rally behind. And so, he made the only choice he could. He would let them leave, but he would never forget the shadow they had cast across his throne. When the Horizon lifted, off, escorted to the edge of Imperial space, billions watched in silence. The humans waved casually from their viewports, smiling as though they had just been visiting guests rather than condemned prisoners. And then, with a burst of light, the Horizon jumped away, leaving the Empire behind. On their ship, the humans laughed, relieved to finally be free of the Emperor's games. While to them, it was nothing more than another strange adventure to add to their journals. But to the galaxy, it was something else entirely. In the days that followed, whispers spread faster than fire. On remote colonies, workers repeated the story of the fearless humans. On hidden channels, rebels used their names as rallying cries. Even within the capital, small groups began speaking in hushed tones about the weakness of the throne. Fear, the foundation of the empire, was beginning to crumble. And the more people spoke of the humans, the stronger the cracks became. The Emperor could not silence them all. The idea was already alive. On the horizon, stars stretched into streaks during the jump. Lewis leaned back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. He told his crew they had survived worse before and would survive worse again. Kara laughed and reminded him that next time, maybe they should double-check their coordinates. The crew chuckled together, their voices light, their hearts unshaken. They had no idea that their laughter had terrified an empire. Far away in the Emperor's throne room, silence reigned. He sat alone, staring into the void of space. For centuries his empire had ruled with power and fear, but now he understood something chilling. Fear could be broken, and once it was broken, it could never be fully restored. The humans had not come with fleets or weapons. They had not conquered with fire or steel. They had done something far worse. They had acted like the Empire's power was nothing. And in doing so, they had planted terror deeper than any weapon ever could. The galaxy now whispered a new truth. If humans could laugh at death, then what would happen when they finally grew serious?